After nearly half an hour of convincing, and a bribe of half a box of sugar apple bombs, we left Pallet to play with brass, while Sky, Carlotta, and I collected the bodies of the dead in a row out front of the city hall. The decrepit building had shifted to one side on its foundations, only slightly enough to look odd amongst the rest of the town. It was mid-morning when Sky called me over. The bloodied body of a light blue Pegasus stallion with a deep blue mane was slumped against an overturned wooden cart, his silver eyes gazing lifelessly at the crimson form of a set of gunshot wounds in his waist, as it mixed into the mud in a large puddle below him. Shit. I dropped my eyes as I muttered under my breath. From what she'd told us, this was Pallet's father. Sky walked over and shut his eyes gently before leaning in. Rest easy now. I could hear her trying to choke back the tears that were even starting to cloud my vision. We will care for your daughter. We'll get her someplace safe. In my head, I knew that meant postponing our chase after 42, and that we couldn't waste any more time than we already had to catch up. And just then I realized, as my mind ran out of control, this filly just lost the only thing in the world she knew, and that I, nothing more than a traveling peddler of wares, was going to take her in. The wasteland sure had one fucked up sense of humor to put her through what Sky and I had suffered so hard with. But that's where I was wrong. This filly was alone and scared in this desolate world now, all because of a mistake I made. Skyline went up to pick up the stallion, but as she hoisted him up, I put a hoof on her shoulder and shook her head. I'm the reason he's dead. I need to carry the weight of him on my shoulders. I knew that the weight of my conscience wasn't enough, and I would never be as I lived for the rest of my life. She seemed to nod and shifted the muscular stallion onto my back. He was heavy enough that I sank a few more inches than normal into the mud with every step, slowing my pace to a crawl. I looked over and noticed his blood dripping down onto my saddlebags, thinking I'd be damned if I didn't deserve to be buried with all these ponies after my sins. As we turned down the street to City Hall, Sky and I noticed Carlotta waving her arms as she passed against a wall down the alleyway, trying to get our attention. Her expression was a rock-solid calmness. Odd. I only saw her like that before, when we were in combat. The sound of a soft squishiness came towards us, my ear picking it up before I had noticed the 5 red bars in my compass. They were heading towards us. The telltale sound that leather armor made when it moved was a dead giveaway that they were no random ponies, and the lining and jingling of brass bullets were evidence that they had at least one firearm. Well, well, look what we have here, boys. I spun around, glancing at a group of raider ponies as they trotted up to Sky and I, slowly spreading out into a semicircle around us. Fuck. I was normally on top of my surroundings. How did I not see this coming? I did happen to notice something odd about them. They were all earth ponies, not a single horn or wing amongst them. The group was, however, well armored, as reinforced leather barding covered all but the stallion in the center, not to mention they were relatively well armed. The 2 mares flanking, who I assumed was the leader, held a sledgehammer and a fire axe in their mouths, while the stallions on either side, held poorly maintained double-barrel shotguns in theirs. As for the center stallion, he wore only a stylish black jacket with leather pads sewn onto them. A rainbow bandana kept his shortly cut jet-black mane standing into the air on his head. Most importantly, he seemed unarmed, and I didn't trust that. Looks like we got some grave robbers trying to pick off our poor dead townfolk. Should we let them pay the fine for scavenging in our turf? He paused, letting the others shake their heads. Or should we just kill them? The leader's voice was just that, someone in command, but he seemed to have more than just a note of self-acknowledgement. He liked his show of force, and he wanted those under him eager to do anything he asked. Skyline leaned over to me slowly, not breaking eye contact with my group. Your call, Backlash. I think I can take them. The leader twitched for a moment, slowly turning his cold blue eyes from Sky to lock onto mine, as the most nefarious grin grew across his face. Wait. Backlash! He almost had to giggle through his teeth. As in, little baby bro Backlash? I froze and stared wide-eyed back. No, it wasn't possible. Crankshaft left us in Hoofington. There was no way his gang controlled this far inland. The raider leader seemed to jump around giddily in the mud as his lackeys seemed as confused as Skyline. Shit, it is you, isn't it? He eyed his comrades for a moment, before stiffening up a bit, coughing softly in his hoof to clear his throat. If I knew that pink bitch had paid me to kill my own brother, I'd have asked for double. It's so much harder to lose some pony whose family. Am I right? He trotted up closer. I could see that his cream-colored hide was mostly intact, but his entire flank and rear left leg were horribly burned. How is Mother, by the way? No doubt she's making you do all the hard work while she gets drunk off your living. When you selfishly left, she tried to get us out of that stupid town, I stated, letting my rising anger come out. And because I wasn't old enough to think about what I was doing, she had to save me from a fucking radgator and died so I could get away. Boredly, he looked at his muddy hooves. Hey, that bitch gal was coming to her. And it's not my fault you were weak back then. I got the hell out of there when I was strong enough to see she was just using us. His stupidly wide smile made my blood boil as he insulted Mother. If it weren't for the stallion on my back, I would have torn him to pieces. But look at you now, all grown up and shit. Plus, I see you picked up one sexy-looking mare friend. He eyed Sky over eagerly, no doubt thinking of all the perverted and horrid acts he could do once he killed me and could get her alone. That wasn't going to happen. Back off, asshole! Sky yelled out, around the bit in her battle saddle. Crankshaft looked stunned for a quick moment, before letting out a deep laugh. Oh, she's feisty. Maybe I'll let some of the boys use her before selling her to the slavers. He laughed, in a way only a demented, twisted soul could, its echo reverberating deep inside my thoughts. No, this wasn't my brother. That Crankshaft was the only one to care for me and Mom before he left. And that stallion is still somewhere in Hoofington, running a gang by now. This sadistic excuse for a raider couldn't be him. I tweaked my ear again. I could hear a deep thudding in the distance, smirking softly. You say that a pink mare hired you? Looked a bit like the ministry mare from before the war? I spoke softly, causing him to pause for a moment. Yeah, I'm pretty sure she's that cunt that the DJ douchebag is going on about. Why? Want me to give her your last words? He said as he leaned in close to my face and raised a hoof to his lackeys, signaling to get ready. I could hear the whirl of an autoloader coming up the alley and the flutter of wings on the rooftops behind me. Yeah, tell her I'm coming for her, I said calmly, before using all my might to hurl Pellet's father on top of Crankshaft, pinning him to the muddied ground. To the credit of his companions, they didn't seem too fazed by the action, and only hesitated for a moment. But a moment was all I needed. The air exploded into gunfire as Brass and Carlotta opened up on the two raider mares, perforating them with dozens of rounds before they even lifted a hoof to move towards Sky and I. I watched as the splatters of mud and gore coated the stallion, hefting his shotgun at me. He flinched and pulled his head aside, firing blindly. I tensed up as most of the shot failed to find me, but a few large pellets that did punch all the way through my foreleg hurt like hell as time crawled to a stop. I had forgotten that the pip-buck had a targeting spell because, honestly, combat was still new to me. Hell, back before this week, I had maybe been in 2 or 3 gunfights a year, and they never expected Sky to be there. Plus, this spell was useless when the only gun I carried was in my saddlebag. The highlight around the raider in my vision flickered away and was replaced by a pink square labeled inventory, puzzling me for a moment. Pip-bucks were still a bit of a mystery to me. All the ones I'd seen in my travels were either dead from age or still on the arms of ponies. I knew that it took a pony a lot smarter than me to figure out exactly how so many spells could be kept inside of such a tiny object, or what they all did. I looked across each of the tabs before the computer would switch to them in response to show me what I had. Well, that was convenient, I thought, noting that they were needed to be an electric manual for these things. With that, a small rectangle screen popped up over everything else, displaying the title, in SATS Inventory Management Tutorial Audio Log. The sound of a middle-aged mare with a thick accent sounded like she lived in the country in all her life began to play in my head. Well, hey there, Pinky. It's me, your best friend Applebloom. If you're here in this here tutorial, it's 'cause you're wanting to figure out all the neat little functions of your pip-buck. Now, I'm sure you don't want all the boring techno-babble Scoots would have given you, so I'll make it simple for you. Just think of the item you're needing, and the computer will fetch it for you. Then, think of one of the options below you want, and it'll do it. Easy peasy. Oh, and Twilight asked me to install a simpler version of one of her spells to help you out. Because, you're so busy with all that ministry of yours and whatnot. Anyway, she thought it'd be a mite easier on you if you didn't have to grab things out of your bags. It's a teleportation spell specifically designed to use in sats. Just activate the inventories, scroll to the item you need, and think equip, and pow! Whenever you hanker for is right there in your hoof, faster than Celestia on sliced cake. Anyway, hope that helps you as much as she thought it would. The recording stopped and the window closed. I sat for a moment just thinking to myself that the thing is fucking awesome. What else can it do? My thoughts raced as I went to scroll to another page, quickly looking over the frozen stallion down the street, bringing my train of thought to a screeching halt. My vision drifted back to him for a moment. Oh, right. I was in the middle of a fight. I needed to arm myself, kill the bad guys, then I can learn more. I switched to the weapon tab and selected the party cannon, letting the computer highlight it. As I thought about equipping it, there was a bright purple flash in the corner of my vision before I could feel the weapon's familiar suction against my injured foreleg. The inventory screen popped away as the raider in front of me was divided into pink sections, each giving a percentage to hit. The highest number was in his chest, though I thought I might as well shoot him there. Poor choice of words, it turns out, as the spell registered the shot and swung my hoof up for me, assisting my aim in time as it started to creep forward again. I watched in awe as the cannon fired its spherical black projectile out as the weapon lined up with his chest, like the 10-inch ball slamming into the stallion. In distorted time, I saw his chest cave in and his sides expand, bursting along the bulging points, like a zipper on a meat-filled saddlebag, the fur on his chest ripping as his head bent down towards the gaping hole as I watched him seemingly turn inside out. The explosion of gore flew in every direction as the cannonball continued flying into the storefront behind him, and time returned to its normal speed. I turned my gaze just in time to see Sky's Gauss rifle punch 2 hoop-sized tubes straight through the chest of the last raider, his viscera hanging out the back of his body as he dropped to the ground with a meaty thump. I heard a whisper from under Pallet's father, and looked down to see the wide, fright-filled eyes of Crankshaft as his whole body shook. As I turned to talk to Sky, he cringed and cowered, tucking himself under the large corpse. I looked over to her as Brass and Carlotta joined our sides. Get the weapons, destroy them, and let him go, I said softly, reaching back and pulling the party cannon back into my saddlebags, wincing as I stepped back on my injured leg. Are you kidding me? Sky shouted out and pushed off into the air, her voice echoing down the empty streets. This asshole shows up out of nowhere and tries to kill us, and you're letting him go? She pointed her rifles back at the shocked expression now on Crankshaft's face, making him cringe and whimper again. Look, I know how you feel, but we don't kill unarmed ponies, do we? We aren't raiders, and we've beaten him. I'm giving him his life. End of discussion, I said, looking back up at her sternly. And should he ever be so stupid to try this shit again, then you have my express permission to shove your rifles up his ass and decorate a room with him. I reached down and unpinned the frightened raider, leaning close and staring into his watering blue eyes. Got it? He gave off a short nod before scrambling to his hooves, taking down the street at his fastest gallop. You know you're going to regret letting him go, Sky said as she floated gently next to me and brought one of the healing bandages from her bag, wrapping it around my injured hoof. I gulped down one of her healing potions, feeling my wounds knitting themselves together inside. I nodded in response as I noticed Brass walk over and effortlessly stomp on one of the shotguns, bending the barrel at an odd angle. I know I will, but it won't be until after I put an end to 42, I said with a sigh. At least, I hoped fate would allow me to deal with her first. Brass went back to watching over Pallet as the rest of us spent the majority of the afternoon digging a mass grave outside of town near the entrance to the Everfree Forest. For reasons unknown to me, the dark and twisted forest had somehow survived the hellish horrors of the Great War, and seemed to give off the distinct impression that something inside was watching us. To be honest, this damned forest was the reason I mostly stayed away from Ponyville, only making a run out here every few months to sell essentials like medicine. It had only been about a week since all this started, and I was sorely missing my old cart and the day-to-day bore of walking everywhere. At least, then, we got to scavenge. As we covered the last of the grave, I stood back, and I struck the shovel in the dirt and sat down. It was hard to think that underneath this mound lie 28 innocent ponies, all of them having paid the price for my quest of glory. If I had just let that bunker stay closed, I said softly to the ground, hoping that somehow my sorrowful words would dig down and give them back the lives that 42 stole. I felt a hoof wrap around my side as Skyline leaned in close. I lay against her and sobbed quietly into her neck as she comforted me. Shh, she whispered to me. Her soft voice trembled with sorrow as well. It's okay. We'll find a place for Pallet, and then we'll catch up to her, and we will stop her. We sat there for a moment, me crying while she was the strong one. There was the low rumble of thunder on the horizon, and we knew it was time to get going. What if we can't? I started to say as we walked back to the sky cart, getting cut off by Carlotta as her talons crumpled my muzzle shut. Shut your fucking mouth. I've had it with your sad sack attitude. She let go and pucked my chest sharply, her piercing blue eyes cutting through the depression fog in my mind. We're going to fucking kill her for what she did here, and we're going to save the wasteland. And we'll all be the big damn heroes and shit. I grunted and gave a small nod. I hated it, but she was right. This needed to be done, and we were the only ones who even had a clue on what to expect. I dug my saddlebags for a map and pulled it out, walking up to the porch of Pallet's house and unfurling it. DJ Pone 3 said she was heading west, so she'll probably be stopping here. I pointed with a hoof to the small symbol of a house a good distance from Ponyville. She'll need to stop to charge the spark batteries. They're in Miney, but I don't know where she'd go from there. I looked over the map. She only had a couple of choices if she wanted to stay ahead of us. Reference Point is just an old research station not too far south, but it's inside the Everfree Forest, and the most significant of the 3 locations, while the Sugar Apple Bombs factory is north, and the closest but most logical, or illogical of choices even for her. But that still left the unused power substation complex to the west. With that question, why would she go there? I grumbled in anger and slammed my hoof on the warped wood of the porch, startling the others. Think, brain! I want to be one step ahead of her this time. We need to go. Skyline called to me as she helped Carlotta into the straps of the skycar. Brass stomped by with Pallet Jack, riding on his back. She had his helmet over herself, covering most of her body, as the enormous headpiece made her look ridiculous. I couldn't help but draw a small smile as they went into the silver pod. Sighing, I rolled the map back up and put it away, stepping into the metal hull and latching the door shut. I made sure to latch it 3 times, because, honestly, falling out once was enough. As we lifted off and banked west, I looked out at the burial mound, thinking how maybe once this was all over, I could come back and give each pony a proper burial. The wind whipped through the passenger compartment, through the broken windows as we flew towards the tiny village of Miney. I racked my mind for anything I could remember about it. It had been almost half a year since I had seen these parts with Sky, and anything I could remember might be able to give us a leg up on 42. I remember seeing its history years ago when in Ponyville. It wasn't until the war that they even put that place on the map, and it's named as such for a reason. They wrote that if you were galloping straight through the town, by the time you could finish a line, you'd miss it. The whole reason it existed was it was the only motel and gas station on the road that would take you to the power station, once used to feed power all the way over to Olney. As the war picked up, they built the Sugar Apple Bombs factory to the south, housing the families in 4-block apartment buildings, effectively making Miney a small town. Twilight Sparkle proposed building a new spell research facility out and away from the city, planning its location to be in the Everfree Forest to the north. With the facility's completion, the scientists and researchers moved into the cramped suburbs of newer, cheaply manufactured homes. But I looked out the window as we passed over the small village and remembered. None of those buildings were built with any care, and most probably have collapsed or remained unstable, skeletal frameworks, leaving the 4 brick buildings in the center of town as the only livable structures left. There were only a handful of ponies living there when last I came through. No more than 7 or 8. So maybe she'd just let them be. We descended as the sun itself fell under the horizon, plunging the land into a sea of dark shadows. Carlotta landed the skycar in the center of the 4 buildings with little trouble, which made me immediately know something was wrong. There were no lights and sounds other than the cool evening breeze. It almost seemed like we had landed into a ghost town. I unlatched the door, swinging it open slowly as I looked around and felt my hooves ache. I heard a knock and jumped into the air as one of the brick building doors swung open, a soft yellow light pouring out from deep in the center of the building, without a pony in sight. "What's gotten into him?" Carlotta remarked as Skyline hovered next to her. "Stay right here," I said, trotting over to the open doorway, stepping inside slowly. "I need to see—" That's all I got out before I snagged a tripwire with my hoof. The deafening sound reported as a rifle stung my ears as I felt a round punch into my flak vest, knocking me to the ground. I groaned and got back up slowly, leaning against the outside of the building as my companions called out to me. "I'm okay," I said, as I winced and looked down. A shiny silver object stuck to the plate of my vest as a small nub shimmering in the low light with a rainbow sheen. My mind made the connection quickly, and I had seen this type of material before when I had scavenged. It was... what was its name? Star metal? It's dangerous stuff. I'm pretty sure the round would have punched through the plate if it wasn't made out of the same material. Thanks Celestia DJ.3 gave me this vest. Wait, Where the fuck did they get this? These rounds are rare as they come. I pried the nub off with my hoof. I could count the number of star metal bullets I'd found and sold to buyers, and this wasn't one of them. Skyline smacked me on the back of the head. You moron! You know better than to walk into places that you don't know. That's why I have wings. I watched as she fluttered inside softly, disappearing to the back before I heard the loud twang of another tripwire. She flew through the doorway as a crimson bolt screamed at the top of her lungs. Grenade! Get down! I dropped to my belly, covering my head with my hooves, right before the small explosive went off. The blast was mostly absorbed by brick wall, but the glass windows became sharp knives as they blew out. My hearing turned into a soft whine as the projected glass shattered against the side of the sky car, bouncing harmlessly off of Brass's suit as he stood in the doorway of the car. As the dust cleared and I got to my hooves, I could hear a soft murmur coming from Brass as he strode out of the car. Pallet watched wide-eyed from the hatch. He walked up to me and spoke as if he were whispering. Are you all right? I almost didn't hear him, he was so quiet, and I almost didn't want to. My head was pounding and stung as I looked around and saw Carlotta poking her head around the other side of the dinged-up metal pod, Skyline floating behind her with a nervous grin. Brass shook me with his hooves, getting my attention again. I said, are you all right? Did the blast blow out his speaker? I'm okay, I said, back softly for some reason, noticing them cringe. What the hell? What's wrong with my voice? I looked between them nervously, Carlotta's frustrated face not helping as she walked over and clamped my mouth shut again. You blew your hearing for an hour or so. You're lucky you can still hear at all. Now shut the hell up, because your yelling is getting on my nerves. I could see as she strained and yelled back, but even if it didn't sound like it. I forced myself to give a nervous grin and nodded. She turned away, saying something to Brass that I couldn't make out. But even though she had just told me why, my brain instinctively made me act. I tried to stop, I swear it, but it was just too late. What was that? I called out, watching her freeze in place, her head slowly spinning as the meanest glare I'd ever beheld came from her. I could see her body tremble with barely contained rage, the loss of my hearing making it all the more obvious. Oh, Luna, this is going to be the longest hour of my life.